Before the 5-day forecast and the chemical fertilizer truck, our grandmothers held secrets that guaranteed a harvest even when the world was against them. Today, we're uncovering 15 zero-cost methods from a buried forest that waters itself to a nitrogen source the government made illegal to waste that prove the old ways are the only way to true abundance. The moving manure factory, chicken tractors. We think of chickens as egg machines, but your grandparents used them as tiny, tireless agricultural bulldozers, working for free and solving a problem that costs modern gardeners thousands. They had a hidden workforce, one that turned waste into black gold and cut weeding labor in half. This was the ingenious design of the chicken tractor, a low movable pen built from scrap wood and wire. It was placed over a stubborn patch of ground and left for 1 week, transforming an idle bird into a focused farmhand. Think of the back-breaking hour you spend tilling compacted clay. The chickens did it for you, using the weight of their own tiny bodies to loosen the earth. The chickens didn't just walk, they scratched and devoured. They ate every weed seed, every hidden insect, and every lingering pest egg deep in the soil. As they worked, they simultaneously fertilized the earth with their gentle, rich droppings. The pen was then dragged a few feet, leaving behind a cleared, perfectly tilled, and organically fed bed, ready for planting without a shovel lifted. At season's end, the birds were turned loose in empty fields to strip out the old plants. Their constant, frantic scratching mixed all that organic matter stalks, leaves, and roots back into the earth. Nothing was wasted. The garden was quietly prepared for the next crop while the birds were kept well fed. It was an energy-free solution, a simple circle of labor and life. Today, we hire expensive machinery. Back then, they simply let nature's most efficient creature do the heavy lifting. But that efficiency wasn't just about animals. It was about capturing the quiet water you thought was evaporating. Irrigation without a well, the secret of the morning gift. In the driest August, when the creek ran thin, your grandma knew the sky had one more secret to share. She just had to know where to look. The quiet, glistening gift of the morning dew. When the fear of drought gripped the garden, threatening to shrivel the crops and leave the family hungry, water arrived not in buckets or down pipes, but silently, on the surfaces of the plants themselves. This was irrigation without a well, a masterful blend of deep observation and planting strategy. Old gardeners watched how the dew clung to certain broad leaves and fuzzy stems. Plants like borage and lamb's ear were chosen because they gathered more moisture than their neighbors, acting as natural condensers. They were strategically planted among thirsty beans and tender lettuces to share the dampness. They were planted as living funnels, ensuring that not a single drop was lost to evaporation, channeling the cold condensation directly to the thirsty root crown below. Stone walls and garden hollows were also cherished, as their cool surfaces maximized condensation each night. You could walk the garden at sunrise and feel the gift, knowing your crops were drinking long before the sun's heat burned it away. This quiet, ingenious method supplied a vital portion of the water crops needed during dry spells. It was proof that when the rain held back, patience and clever planting could make the entire garden endure. The resilience of the garden required more than just water. It required a soil that could laugh at the desert. Black gold, the fire's last gift to the earth. After the cooking fire died down, modern folks throw the scraps away. But your ancestors knew the dark remains charcoal and ash were the key to unlocking a soil that would outproduce their neighbors for 20 years. They understood that the fire's final gift could build a foundation of fertility that lasted for generations. Old gardeners crushed this black material fine, mixing it with manure and compost, then spreading it across their beds. Unlike plant matter that rotted in one season, these carbon fragments lasted for decades, working like tiny silent sponges. They held moisture in dry times and trapped essential nutrients that would otherwise wash away with the rain. Worms worked the charcoal deep into the earth, year after year, transforming lifeless clay into soil that stayed dark, loose, and rich. Families would simply shovel the half-burnt wood and ash from their cooking fires each spring, a free act that created ground that outproduced neighboring plots. Seeds sprouted more evenly, crops endured longer in droughts, and the need for new manure was drastically reduced. Unlike the modern chemical sacks that disappear after one rain, this carbon backbone created ground that was permanent, turning red, lifeless clay into dark, crumbly earth that yielded bigger root vegetables simply because the soil never hardened. But the ultimate act of preservation wasn't in the soil, it was in protecting the flavor of the fruit itself. A marriage of wood, preserving flavor through skill. They didn't trust seeds to carry on the legacy. The seed was a gamble, often reverting to a wild, bitter ancestor. To save a perfect piece of fruit, that pear, that plum, that tart green apple, your grandparents became surgeons, uniting two trees into one unbreakable family. This was the quiet, necessary skill of grafting, a practice that ensured the sweetest flavors survived generations of harsh weather and disease. Rather than waiting years for a seed to produce an often wild, unpredictable tree, gardeners took a scion from their favorite variety and joined it onto a strong, hardy native rootstock. To guarantee the heritage sweetness, they performed the V-cut, binding the scion limb with a specialized wax that sealed the wound, forcing the two distinct life forces to merge. This strategic marriage allowed fragile but delicious fruit varieties to thrive on bases that naturally resisted local disease, frost, and difficult soil conditions. Orchards were not collections of random trees. They were living libraries of flavors, each tree carrying the enduring strength of the root and the delicate sweetness of the chosen limb. The work demanded knowledgeable, skillful hands, but the reward was steady, predictable crops year after year, guaranteeing that the taste of your great-grandfather's favorite apple was never truly lost. Once the tree was secure, the work shifted to doubling the crops planted beneath its boughs. Instant abundance, the spade that doubled the harvest every spring. The garden offered a hidden kind of currency. Your grandparents simply found it, dug it up, and split it in half. Twice the harvest, twice the sharing, all for the price of a single hour's work. This was the brilliant, zero-cost magic of root division. Rather than spending money to purchase new stock, old gardeners knew that many of their most productive, enduring crops needed to be renewed, not replaced. For decades-old plants, the center of the root crown can become woody and exhausted. The spade acted as a reset button, pruning the dead core and driving fresh vigor back into the smaller, new divisions. Clumps of rhubarb, horseradish, or the long-term investment of asparagus were dug in the early spring, before they had spent their energy on new growth. A heavy spade was used to cleanly slice the main root mass, and the fresh pieces were replanted into new sections of the garden. Herbs like mint, chives, and thyme spread quickly, and their divisions were considered the expected way to maintain a thriving bed. New plantings were gained for free. Old ones were rejuvenated, and any surplus was always lifted, cut, and shared with neighbors. This was not wasteful. It was the ultimate discipline of abundance, which naturally led to the next step, feeding the abundance that grew with zero-cost fertilizer. But the greatest trick was building a raised bed that watered itself. The buried forest, a raised bed that waters itself. When a tree fell, your grandpa didn't see waste. He saw a 10-year water reservoir. He buried that wood, and on top of it, he grew a garden that laughed at drought and fed itself. This was the resourceful design of hugelkultur, a forgotten method that turned yard debris into a perpetual growing engine. Old gardeners stacked logs, branches, and brushed what most people considered trash to form the core of their raised beds. Piling grass clippings, manure, and soil over this woody base, they created mounds that sat high, making them easy to work without bending. A normal raised bed acts like a sieve, drying out in the afternoon sunday. But hugelkultur's hidden core acted as a thermal battery. The warmth from the slow decomposition kept the soil several degrees warmer, extending the season into the first chill of frost. The genius, however, lay beneath the surface. Over time, the buried wood decayed slowly, releasing a steady stream of nutrients back into the bed, feeding the plants from below. More importantly, the rotting logs held moisture like massive sponges, keeping the plants alive in the driest spells. By utilizing the land's own fallen material, families built long-lasting, self-watering mounds that produced abundant harvests with less maintenance and significantly less watering. This kind of mastery came from listening to the earth, not the radio. Almanac of the Sky, reading the secrets nature kept. Before the 5-day forecast was beamed into your hand, the weather report was written in the garden itself. You just had to know how to read the language of the clouds, the leaves, and the tiny frog croaking in the marsh. Your grandparents relied on this rhythm of observation, a deep knowledge passed down through time. Planting wasn't dictated by the calendar, but by clear natural signals. They would not set seed until the oak leaves were the size of a squirrel's ear, a perfect, reliable thermometer for soil warmth. They watched the moon as carefully as the sunrise, knowing that root crops thrived when planted on the waning side, their growth drawn downward by its pull. Conversely, leafy crops and climbing beans fared better when planted as the moon waxed, encouraging upward growth. They relied on the celestial rhythm, a knowledge that stretched back millennia. They studied the woolly caterpillar, noting the width of its band to judge how fierce the coming winter might be. This wasn't guesswork. These little rules lived in family almanacs scribbled by hand, repeated until they were second nature. A red sky at dusk, dandelions bursting in fields, or the heavy scent of earth carried messages that were more reliable than any gadget. By trusting the earth's own signals, they ensured their labor was never wasted on a day the garden wasn't ready. But even the deepest knowledge required a constant, gentle source of nitrogen. The gentle gold, fertilizer that didn't need composting. Your neighbors were dragging heavy, dusty bags of powder home from the feed store. Meanwhile, your grandma had a quiet secret, a fertilizer that came in perfect, ready to use pellets that doubled her tomato harvest. She relied on a small hutch out back, where rabbits provided a constant, quiet gift to the garden. This was the power of rabbit manure, or gentle gold. Unlike the harsh droppings from cows or chickens, which required months of composting to break down, rabbit pellets were mild enough to use fresh. The nitrogen content was perfectly balanced. Unlike the harsh, hot manure from larger animals, these perfect pellets could be scattered directly onto the soil without any risk of burning the tender roots of the lettuce or tomatoes. Each tiny sphere was a ready-made fertilizer rich in nutrients but mild on tender roots. Gathering the manure was simple, often done by slipping trays beneath the hutch or sweeping up the straw. A handful tossed around tomato plants, another sprinkled near lettuce, and the soil was instantly alive with new energy. The plants grew lush, the leaves stayed green, and the expensive store-bought powders vanished. The rabbits were the ultimate dual-purpose animal. They gave meat or fur in lean times, and their output fed a whole family's vegetables with ease. The steady, natural power of that quiet hutch kept the soil producing year after year. But for coastal gardens, the best source of fertility was delivered by the waves. The ocean's offering, taming the soil with the tide. After a heavy storm, the shoreline was a place of work, not rest. Coastal gardeners understood that the sea did not take from the land it gave back, throwing ashore a bounty of minerals that made their crops taste richer than any inland farm. This quiet transaction between the ocean and the field was the secret of seaweed fertilizer. Farmers walked the tide line, gathering piles of kelp and other seaweed tossed in by the waves. They understood that a great portion of the continent's soil was mineral poor, lacking the trace elements the ocean held. They didn't haul it away. They dragged it directly to the fields and laid it thick between the rows as a rich, living mulch. Seaweed carried minerals such as potassium, iodine, and magnesium that were often scarce in traditional soil. It served multiple crucial functions. It decomposed quickly, feeding crops within weeks. It held moisture like a sponge, lessening the need to water. And its slimy texture bound sandy soil together while simultaneously lightening heavy, clay-rich earth. To deliver this deep nutrition directly, some resourceful gardeners didn't use it as mulch, but instead boiled the kelp into potent liquid teas, pouring this dark, mineral-rich tonic at the base of their oldest fruit trees for instant revitalization. By letting the ocean's tide work for them, they ensured the ground remained dark, loose, and eternally fertile. This focus on efficiency extended beyond materials and straight into the garden's layout. Stitched to perfection, the homely geometry of yield. Forget the long military rows of modern farming. Your grandparents' garden plots looked like a patchwork quilt, squares and rectangles stitched together, a design that was a miracle of efficiency, saving steps and maximizing every inch of dirt. This was quilt gardening, where every patch of soil mattered. The design was deceptively simple, arranged not for show, but for pure practicality. The plots were small, separated by narrow footpaths, layered with straw or sawdust. This simple geometry had two crucial effects. First, it ensured a gardener could reach every single plant without ever setting foot on the growing area. Soil that stayed light and loose grew better crops, as compaction was avoided a major yield killer. Furthermore, this homely geometry was a massive saver of human energy. Second, it meant a gardener could weed or water without trudging across the whole yard, saving nearly half the walking distance of straight-row fields. Each square became its own mini-garden, one for beans, one for lettuce, one for onions, allowing for easy crop rotation and better pest confusion. The quilt garden was a testament to applied wisdom, proving that order and clever layout could be easy on the back, light on the feet, and heavy with produce. This obsession with maximizing space and time extended to the clock and the seasons. The busy earth. Never let a square foot sit idle. Most gardeners declare defeat when the first frost hits, but to the old guard, the land worked 12 months a year. They saw winter not as an end, but as a long planning session for a garden that never truly slept. This was the secret of the year-round planting calendar, a disciplined approach that ensured every square foot had more than one job to do, warding off the terrible fear of an empty pantry. Planting was never an all-at-once event. It was staggered across the weeks. They wouldn't put all their lettuce seed down at once, but in little batches every couple of weeks, ensuring the table was never without fresh leaves. This staggered approach also acted as insurance. If a sudden spring pest arrived, it wouldn't wipe out one single massive crop, but only a small portion, guaranteeing that the bulk of the food supply would survive to maturity. The moment one crop was pulled, another was scheduled to take its place in the same soil. Peas gave way to beans, onions to turnips, and early tomatoes made room for autumn greens. Families often measured their planting by old formulas: so many tomato plants per person, so many rows of potatoes to fill the cellar. Nothing was allowed to waste space or sit bare if it could be growing something. Even a small yard could feed mouths through 3 seasons if planned carefully, keeping the soil busy but never exhausted, because rotation and care made it rich and productive for a continuous harvest. Yet, the most valuable zero-cost fertilizer was always the one modern society threw away. The hidden nitrogen source. Nothing was wasted. It was a practice not spoken of loudly, but common in every household. In poor years, when manure was scarce, your ancestors turned to the human body for one of the best nitrogen sources known to man. They viewed what others threw away as a necessary part of the cycle of soil and food. This was the use of urine fertilizer, sometimes gathered in clay pots or barrels specifically for the garden. When the survival of the family depended on the harvest, sentimentality vanished. The liquid contained the highest nitrogen percentage available, making it a powerful, zero-cost substitute for scarce animal manure. The liquid contained rich, readily available nitrogen, the fuel for strong green vegetative growth. To neutralize the strength, it was always heavily diluted with water before being applied around the base of the plants. Cabbages grew greener, grain stood taller, and fruit trees pushed stronger growth. The results were clear. It was the difference between a hungry winter and a full pantry. The liquid soaked quickly into the ground, leaving no trace but healthier plants. It was a humble, silent practice, a discipline that transformed a modern taboo into a practical, energy-free necessity. By embracing this hidden source, families ensured their soil remained full of life and their pantries stayed stocked. Beyond fertilizer, they mastered how to save time and energy by organizing the land around their own footsteps. Counting the steps, the geometry of convenience. The smartest gardeners weren't just planters, they were walkers who counted their steps. Their yard was arranged in perfect, invisible circles, ensuring they never wasted a minute trekking across the yard for a handful of mint. This was the disciplined layout of zone gardening, a system built to save energy and time. Old gardeners arranged their plots in zones, each space chosen for how often it required a visit. The principle was simple: proximity equals productivity. Closest to the kitchen door sat Zone 1, holding the quick pickings, parsley, lettuce, and onions. A step outside meant dinner was already seasoned, requiring no long journey. This arrangement was especially valuable for older gardeners, sparing tired feet and allowing them to stay active in the field for years longer. A little farther off was Zone 2, reserved for main crops like beans, peas, and carrots, which needed care only once or twice a week. At the far edge of the plot was Zone 3, where low-maintenance crops, potatoes, pumpkins, and winter squash sprawled, left mostly alone until the large harvest. This simple arrangement was pure genius. It meant paths led straight to the plants most often touched, and long rows of seldom-tended crops grew where they wouldn't demand daily presence. By grouping crops by their care requirement, your grandma cut labor in half without losing a single bite of food. But when the seasons changed, the final lesson was about protecting the soil from the empty winter. The winter blanket, letting the plants do the work. When the harvest was done, the ground never sat bare. To leave it naked was to invite disaster. Your grandparents tucked their fields in for the winter with a green blanket, letting the cover crops work while the gardener rested. Old gardeners knew that bare soil lost its strength quickly, surrendering to the damaging forces of wind, rain, and frost. Instead, they sowed cover crops, plants like rye, clover, or buckwheat that grew quickly in the autumn chill and fed the soil rather than the family. These hardy greens held the ground together through the harshest winter, preventing valuable topsoil from washing away and pulling deep nutrients up from the subsoil. They also acted as a living defense, preventing weeds from taking root in the empty beds. When spring neared, the gardener's work was minimal. The cover crops were simply cut down and turned under, letting the entire green mass rot into rich organic earth. When spring arrived, the difference was stark. The neighbor's soil was a hard, dead sheet of gray clay. But this ground, protected by its green blanket, woke up ready, already softened, enriched, and eager for the spring planting. This was the brilliant, effortless secret. Let the plants do the hard work of renewal while the human hand rested. The final act of wisdom was learning that not all weeds were the enemy. The minor plants. Why not every weed was cursed weeds are not the enemy. They're nature's uninvited minors. Your grandma knew that dandelions and comfrey were hauling up minerals from deep beneath the surface, a free fertilizer delivery service. These plants were retrieving the deep value that conventional crops could never reach. She saw a plant's worth not just in its fruit, but in its hidden subterranean labor. While modern gardeners curse the sight of a dandelion, old hands were more selective. They understood that some weeds, such as comfrey and yarrow, possessed deep taproots capable of reaching nutrients like calcium and potassium that conventional crops couldn't access. These were natural vacuum cleaners, bringing up nutrients from levels where the short roots of tomatoes and corn could never reach. Instead of pulling these minor plants out and discarding them, the wise gardener would trim them down and lay their broad leaves right on the garden bed. This was the original, simple form of natural mulch. The leaves would slowly rot into the soil, releasing their valuable mineral stores exactly where the vegetable roots needed them. Furthermore, the constant presence of these plants helped to break up heavy clay, and their decaying leaves provided food for earthworms. The resourceful gardener worked with these plants, allowing nature to return her own gifts, keeping the soil richer year after year with little to no cost. The final act of wisdom was learning that success didn't come from fighting nature, but from mastering how to make it work for you. If these forgotten traditions surprised you, hit the like button and tell us which one you're bringing back to your own garden in the comments below. And for more secrets from the masters of self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe before you click the next video.